So good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you so much for making your time at this hour of the day. It's a weekday, 6 p.m. Not the usual kinds that you'd like to turn up for a webinar, but we're more than happy to have you today at the webinar. So, coming to the topic. And before the topic, I would really like to first introduce the speaker for the day, Harsh Roontaji. So, as you know, he's a chartered accountant and a SEBI registered investment advisor. He runs his own boutique investment management firm. He's a financial coach, and he's a regular columnist for Business Standard. He's also set up ICICI's retail lending business from scratch. And he successfully founded, operated, and exited apnapaisa.com and apnaloan.com. He's conducted more than 50 workshops on NRIs, loan management, investor awareness campaigns. So one of the thing about Harshji is that he's a chartered accountant, pass out of the batch 1983. And interestingly, I am born in 1990, so his years as a chartered accountant and his years in personal finance is more than I've been alive on the planet, and that really speaks for his knowledge and his ability to make personal finance very easy and everybody able to understand the way it is. And he's an expert at NRI. Whenever we have any queries, we always go to Harshji, and it just gets sorted in a minute. So what we'll do is, by the time he joins in, we'll quickly also run a poll. And the poll is basically, based on the first is that, have you made a will? It's basically, what we want to understand, whether how comfortable you are with the subject and how much you know about the subject. So I'll just launch the poll. Is everybody able to see here? Welcome, Harshji.
Thank you. Technical problems.
Yes. So we've got a wonderful audience. Everybody, nobody left the webinar. Everybody waited for you to give it for you, on your inputs on the subject. So we'll close the poll in the next 10 seconds. If anybody would like to vote, now is the time.
Yeah, and we'll request everyone to participate. It's a very simple poll. So you can write about only 65% of the audience which are present have taken the poll.
Okay, now it's
You can display the results now.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Share the results.
Here it is, sir.
Okay, so I think thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry for the delay for joining the webinar. I got delayed, as they say, due to technical reasons. Now that we are up and running, I think as you can see, even in this audience, which has so much interest in dealing with the subject of inheritance, etc., you have 82% people who haven't made their will. And just let's look at the reasons that they haven't made their will. Okay, people haven't thought about it, but single most important reason, 42%. Okay, know that it is important, it is something that I want to do, but still are not able to do it simply out of inertia. So I think that is a real key thing. Other people don't know how to go about doing it. So, that is the other thing. I'm going to stop sharing the results now. I think can I share my screen, Jinay?
Yes, sir. You can directly share your screen.
Okay.
You get replay.
So this isn't about a will. Today's webinar clearly is not about a will. Okay. So, I mean, even though our first poll was about a will, this is something, at least about a will, people are aware. There is some awareness about a will. What I'm going to talk about today is not about the will. And to talk about preparing for disability, I'm going to narrate a true story. And the true story is my own. This is a learning that I had myself. And we are now using those learnings. And this is the learnings I want to share with all of you. August 19, 2016, in one instant, my life changed. That's about 4 years ago. My then 83-year-old father, he suffered from a debilitating stroke. His bodily functions were heavily impacted. The recognition was impaired. Forget speech, he could not recognize people. Fortunately, he did have some recognition. He could recognize me, he could recognize my sister, he could recognize his friends or my son, my sister's son or daughter, etc. And but otherwise, even communication through sign language was difficult. And obviously, I mean, given all that, he obviously could not sign. Okay, signature was out of question. He was bedridden. He had a huge stroke. Of course, medical attention ensured that he survived. He is still here. It's been 4 years. It's been almost 4 years. He's now 87 years old. He's still very much here. Okay. This episode that happened in 2016, it impacted our lives in many, many ways. Okay. What I want to, of course, dwell on are the financial aspects. Okay. Plus some decisions that we had to take, which we hadn't really, thought about. Things like whether to use artificial life support systems or not. The doctors asked us, because he was not in a very good shape when he was taken to the hospital. The doctors asked us in advance, you please decide whether you want to use the ventilator. It is possible that his situation may be such that we might have to use ventilators. You please decide whether you want the ventilators to be used or not. Now, this was not the kind of discussion that either me or my elder sister ever had with my father. So my father was born in 1933. I mean, that generation obviously didn't discuss these kind of things. Forget that generation. Our generation, the generation after that, the millennials, nobody likes to think of these things. So there was no discussion. So we had no idea what he wanted. And those were the two, I think, about 2 hours of excruciating and very, very tough time in my life, my sister's life, as we talked to each other, we talked to our uncles, we talked to our children, we talked to a very close friend of my father as to what they felt. Ultimately, we took a decision saying that, okay, please go ahead, use whatever you need to. Fortunately for us, that decision was never required to be implemented. What I want to highlight, of course, is the fact that taking that decision was a very tough thing. And one reason why taking that decision was tough was because we had never spoken about it. Okay. I will now ask Jinay to take a quick poll to see.
Okay, last 15 seconds.
Okay, I think we can end the polling.
Yeah. I'll just share the results. Here it is, sir.
Overwhelming majority, I think overwhelming majority hasn't spoken about these things, hasn't really, their family is not aware. I mean, 80% of you have said, okay, that your families are not aware of your views on what to do should artificial life maintenance devices need to be used. The thought that I want to leave with you, is it something that you should be doing? I want to leave that thought with you as I take you through the rest of my story. So now my father came home somewhere on September 3rd, 2016. He came back. Okay. Those 15 days he was in hospital. We took those decisions. He came back. I mean, as I said, he was hugely impacted. But thanks to the medical attention, the quick medical attention, he was live. Right? The one thing that we discovered, so the hospital thing just went by like a blur. When we came back, we discovered that we could not access his financial assets despite being his nominees. Me and my sister, we were his nominees. And when I looked around, me being me, and I'm a planner, so I looked around. This was the first time I did this. Okay, we discovered that the laws just did not cover this kind of an eventuality. We do not have a law dealing with an eventuality where the person who has the assets is not in a position to take decisions. What to do in a situation like this? There are no laws. So just to put in perspective what we found, I'm going to give certain facts about my story. My father. So my father is a widower who stays independently. We stay in the same building. He has a staff, so he does some share investment and other kinds. I mean, basically, primarily he's a share investor. He has a staff of 2 people who support his small home office as well as his personal needs. Is absolutely meticulous in maintaining his records. In fact, after this episode in 2016, when I took over, getting information was the least of my problems. All information was very easily available. But my father, he was 83-year-old, remember. He never used net banking or even debit card. But despite that, he had ensured that his mobile and email ID were registered with the bank, in his bank accounts, in the demat account, with his broker. Whenever he needed cash, he would sign a bearer check and his staff would go and withdraw the cash. Any payments that he needed to make to anybody, he would sign a check and do an art, and his staff would either go and give that check to the person, or they would use that check to do an RTGS or an NEFT. All his assets were in his own personal name, in his single personal name. So he was careful enough. He had made sure that there were nominations in place for all of those assets. Okay, so he was very careful. He had made a will. He had registered that will. Okay. Again, so as I said, very meticulous in his record keeping. And just to sort of let you know, my elder sister and I, we are the only children. We are the only heirs of my father. So you could think that, you know, he was fully prepared. What else could he do? Okay, he meticulous record keeping. He had made a will. He had made nominations in place. Okay, everything he thought he had done. But very clearly in what happened with him, these preparations were totally inadequate, as we discovered, right? So, I mean, despite being so meticulous, all the preparations could not help, because nominations don't help, because fortunately he is still very much alive, and therefore nominations don't help in any manner, but he is not able to sign. What had other people done? In the course of my research, I found out, as I said, that there are no laws dealing with it. Okay, I mean, you look up on Google and you will find plenty of cases. There is a case of a doctor couple in Maharashtra. Both are doctors. The male doctor, he suffered from a stroke and he was comatose, and therefore his wife had to sell they had lots of real estate. They wanted to sell the real estate. The wife had to approach the High Court to get permission to be able to sign on behalf of her husband. She was a joint holder, but obviously she could not sign on behalf of her husband without the court approval. There is a public sector unit. Again, they have plenty of fixed deposits, but could not be accessed in the absence of a signature. And again, you have to go to High Court. There are plenty of them. There are lots of, there is an Allahabad High Court decision, there is a Delhi High Court decision, there are Bombay High Court decision. Unfortunately, I think when I looked around, I found that this is happening quite a lot. And these are, remember, only the things that have come to the surface. There will be plenty of other cases. Now, the big case here is the case of Shobha Gopalakrishnan, which is a Kerala High Court case. The reason I say it's a landmark decision is because they went about it in a very systematic fashion. They appointed an amicus curiae and, you know, they laid down guidelines for how you can appoint guardians for people who are in coma. One, if you want to be appointed guardians, okay, you have to be appointed as a guardian for specific property. So you have to give details about that property. You need to know details of that property. Two, the High Court will appoint a medical board, which will include a neurologist. Three, simultaneously, they will ask the Tehsildar or the collector or the deputy collector. They order the collector, collector can send the deputy collector or the Tehsildar to submit reports on close relatives and their financial condition. So you will have a revenue officer come to your family's house to find out all this. The person seeking to be appointed as a guardian should be a close relative and preferably the legal heir of the person. I don't know if you are aware, there is a post of a social welfare officer. In most states, that post has not been filled. Okay. But the social welfare officer for the district needs to be notified. Please remember, any other relative, friend of the patient can move the court for removal of the guardian if in his opinion the person appointed as a guardian is misusing the powers. Of course, the court will give an order. Court itself reserves powers to revoke the guardianship if it sees any misuse of the powers. The guardian is appointed with respect to the specific movable or immovable, the specific fixed deposit, specific bank account, specific immovable property. And the guardian is required to act in the best interest of the patient. I think that's pretty sensible. Importantly, the guardian has to file periodic reports to the Registrar General of the court, and the Registrar General is required to maintain a register of all such persons who are appointed as guardians. And please remember, once the court appoints a guardian, the patient cannot be moved outside the jurisdiction of the court without approval of the court. In short, this is a fairly tedious, expensive, lengthy, and extremely bureaucratic process. You can imagine if you are forced to go through this, or your family is forced to go through this, what will be their state and how difficult it will be for them. But let me come back to my story. My father was clearly not comatose. He had a certain amount of recognition also, cognition also. He, for example, could sing along while his favorite bhajans were being played. He could not speak, but he could sing along. So, I mean, that was a revelation for me as well. But anyways, it was possible that we could have used some other acts under which again there is a local committee and things like that. We could have done that, okay? But both me and my sister, we decided we wanted to use a less tedious way. We just didn't have the energy and the patience to approach high courts and do things in this kind of a manner. So what did we do? Here is what we did. In the first bank, okay, this is a private sector bank. It was frighteningly easy to get access to that first account. Please remember his mobile and internet, his mobile and email. His email was managed by his staff. My father didn't know how to manage email. So his email ID was managed by his staff. Mobile, of course, he kept with himself. The mobile number and the email ID were registered. He had a debit card which he never used. Activating that internet banking and changing the PIN on the debit card and starting to use them was frighteningly simple. So imagine the scope of misuse. In our case, it came in very useful. What I want to highlight is that it is very, very susceptible to misuse. In a second bank, okay, which was his major bank account, where he had a demat account as well, they agreed, both me and my sister, we approached the bank. They agreed to add us as joint account holders based on an approval granted by my father. So the officer came home and he took my father's thumb impression on the approval letter and he was satisfied that the approval was being given based on a informed consent basis. Okay, they were quite cooperative. Once I didn't pull any rank. They didn't know who. I mean, they may or may not have known who I was. Okay, but very clearly they were quite helpful. The third bank, now this was a public sector bank, and they had a large. My father had a largish deposit with them. Again, they were bureaucratically not helpful. Otherwise, the branch manager was helpful. Again, the issue was that they had to send an officer home. Now, in the second bank, we never had any problem getting somebody to come home. In the third, this public sector bank, the guy just didn't have time. It's one of the busiest branches. It's very close to our house. So I remember going there at least 2-3 times. Please come in my car, come with me. Okay, my father also has a lot of medical protocols that were being carried out. So there was a small window during which he could come. He would refuse to come in my car. He said, no, I will not come in your car. I will go in my own vehicle. anyways, it was a logistical nightmare, but ultimately he came. My father's thumb impression was taken. Based on that thumb impression approval, they remitted that money into the second bank account where we were already joint holders. So basically, to summarize what we did in the banks, the first bank account was frighteningly easy, as I said. The control of the mobile and email itself ensured that we had access. In the second bank, we followed the approval process. In the third bank also, we followed the approval process. The big one was the Demat account, because a lot of the resources were basically lying in the Demat account. There, my and my sister's signatures were added as the power of attorney holder, again using his thumb impression, for which again the bank officer came home. He came home separately there was a separate officer for Demat account. Please remember, this is the second bank. So there was a separate officer for Demat account and a separate officer for the bank account. So we managed, as I said, and between these bank accounts and Demat account, we managed. And I think the things are now pretty much well in place. But it gave me something to ruminate on, something to think about. If my father, because he was such a planner, he was so meticulous in his record keeping, could he have done it in a better way? Can I learn some lessons so that if something like this happens to me, my family does not have to go through what we went through? So here is what I found. I'm sharing what I found. The best possible way of dealing with it for all possible assets, okay, is to give a power of attorney. Do it before the event, okay, before any event happens. You don't know. The event, God willing, the event will never happen, okay. But if it happens, please do give a power of attorney. Some of our clients, when we spoke to them, they were very uncomfortable giving a unconditional power of attorney. So because their spouses were as old as they were, they felt that giving and spouses most clients are comfortable with, but the issue with spouses is that they may be as old as the client is, and that therefore may not be useful. And therefore, if they wanted to give it to their children, they were very uncomfortable giving it unconditionally. So we came up with this concept of a conditional power of attorney that can be executed in advance, which becomes operational only if the grantor has become incapacitated and is unable to enter into a contract. The issue with the power of attorney, whether conditional or unconditional, there is one issue. It's not a complete solution. There is a school of thought, and it's a pretty strong school of thought. So I don't know if you are aware, but if I have given a power of attorney to somebody and if I die, the power of attorney automatically ceases. It is coterminous with me. If I die, then that power of attorney no longer remains valid. And most lawyers feel that if I am incapable of contracting, then any power of attorney that I had given when I was capable of contracting will also cease. So it may not remain valid. So the whole purpose of giving a power of attorney may not remain valid. The other issue with a power of attorney is that where it involves immovable property, where it is most important, okay, it requires compulsory registration and has stamp duty and registration cost implications. In most states, when you give so the registration authorities treat power of attorney as a transfer. They treat it and they will accordingly apply stamp duty and registration charges. Most states allow, where it is without consideration, most states allow concessional stamp duty. In Maharashtra, the stamp duty is nominal. It's, I think, 300 rupees. Okay, there used to be a 1% charge over and above the 300 rupees pre-COVID, but after COVID they have waived that 1% charge. So 300 rupees plus registration fee, which is I think 30,000. So I mean, it's not a very expensive thing to do. When we tried doing this with clients, as I said, there was some amount of discomfort in terms of giving an unconditional power of attorney. Apart from, power of attorney, especially where it involves immovable property, going, registering, that itself is a bit of an issue. But let me assure you that it is still helpful. Despite all that I have told you, a power of attorney remains quite powerful because it expresses the intention of the person. So therefore it remains quite powerful, and in most cases it should work. It should definitely work. For bank accounts, what could have been done in advance? Have joint bank accounts. But the issue with joint bank accounts, it has similar control implications, right? If I have another person as a joint bank, it could be my son, it could be my spouse. I mean, if it is on an either or basis, the money can be removed by that person without my knowledge, even when I am hale and hearty. So this is something as financial planners, we need to tell our clients. I have to tell my clients, ki, yes, for bank accounts, having an either or survivor, putting your child's name, putting your spouse's name, there is no problem. But obviously, please be aware that it has control implications. On demat accounts, I really want, or on immovable properties, because this joint holding is touted as a solution to a lot of issues. Let's run a poll to see how good that knowledge is. Okay, I think we have, Jinay, we can end. So great, I think 91% of the people have clearly answered it correctly. 90% plus people have answered it correctly. In a demat account, there is no such concept like a bank account. One person cannot sign on behalf of another. So if there is a joint demat account, and to sign the transfer slip, both parties' signatures is required. Just one party signing does not help in any way. Okay, so both parties will have to sign. The demat account that you normally have with brokers, it is accompanied by a power of attorney, which the broker can use to transfer shares if you have sold shares through him. So that kind of a demat account really helps, because at least if you want to sell the shares, so there you may not need a signature because the broker has a power of attorney. But if you don't want to sell the shares, it is the same issue you will have with the demat account with the broker as you would have in a demat account with a bank or with any other party. Immovable property, the same thing. If two parties are there, one party cannot just sign. Both parties have to sign. Okay. So I think what I just laid down is that you can prepare by having the power of attorney, etc. Okay. These are the workarounds that you can use if you want to avoid the route of, getting power from the High Court, etc. So it is for you to judge, okay, whether I personally feel that workarounds are a very good solution, provided you do them carefully so that there is no misuse. I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are preparing for an event that hopefully will never happen, but you still need to prepare for it. It is your responsibility to prepare for it. But you also need to make sure that if that event does not happen, it is not misused. Whatever you have done is not misused, right? And one of the things that, of course, any workaround for it to be useful is that all the potential heirs need to work jointly together. Because say if you take our story, both me and my sister would go together wherever we went, all the banks, etc. So they were, the bank or everybody was very comfortable, okay, because we are the only two heirs, we are coming together, there is clearly no difference of opinion among us. So the financial institutions feel comfortable about dealing with this. So what did we learn? What did we incorporate? Okay. So what are the workarounds? Access to mobile. Okay. Please give access to the mobile to the, this is the mobile is the key to this lock. This is the most important key to this lock. And what are the keys? Nowadays mobiles, in 2016 when it happened, my father had a plain simple Nokia phone. It was not even a smartphone. Okay, he did not know how to use a smartphone. But now you have phones with unlock codes, patterns, fingerprint. All these need to be shared if you want to prepare. The best, as I said, is a stamped and registered conditional or unconditional power of attorney to deal with immovable properties, bank accounts, and demat accounts. Your mobile very clearly is a vulnerability in the system. Okay, so I, for example, today if my mobile goes on the blank, if it goes on the blink for more than 2-5 minutes, I become, and somebody else's mobile is working and mine has gone on the blink, I get extremely paranoid about it. And I would suggest you do too, because somebody who controls your mobile and knows your history, he can really access a lot of your wealth. So this is a vulnerability, but you need to be vulnerable with somebody, with some safeguards. And I think that's where, and the other is your email. So your email password, once you have mobile and email, I think getting access to movable assets becomes reasonably easy. So we use a email password vault called LastPass, but use Google password vaults and you will get plenty of them on Google. Most of them are free. There were further learnings that happened. Unfortunately, I think there were further learnings that I had. My father tested positive for COVID. This happened to us end of April. Okay, and he was admitted to the hospital. By this time, of course, there was no issue about accessing his resources. But because my spouse and I, we had also tested, we were also tested because obviously we had contact with him. We fortunately tested negative eventually. But at the time between the test having happened and the results coming out, it was a very tense time for us, both with my father being in the hospital and we not being sure whether we were negative or positive. It was possible, I thought that, I will turn positive. I was feeling fine and that I may have to go to hospital. And please remember, this is end of April, beginning of May. I mean, the fear factor has reduced a lot. This was at the height of the fear factor, that I may go to a hospital fully conscious, but I may become unconscious. I was handling resources for myself and for my father. Okay, so I was cognizant of the double responsibilities that I had. One of my biggest learning, which has got nothing to do with the subject here, is that COVID is very beatable. My father was all 87 years old when he was diagnosed with COVID. He was in hospital for about 13 or 14 days. He beat COVID. He is well. I mean, he's as well as he was after the stroke. There are no after effects of COVID. COVID is very beatable. If an 87-year-old person with these kind of morbidities can beat COVID, any of us can. So we need to have that learning as well. Coming back to the access to my mobile, I mean, I was not sure. I may take my mobile with me to the hospital because I was conscious. And afterwards, if I fell unconscious, it is possible the mobile may not come out because people are not allowed inside the hospital. So I looked at two possible scenarios, that the family has access to my mobile. So one of the things that I hadn't done, which was putting my spouse's fingerprint in the mobile as my fingerprint so that she could access my mobile. Now that I think it can be pretty scary thought that your spouse can read your mobile anytime she wants. But I think that's a necessary, at least at my age, that's not a problem for me. The only big thing that is in my sole name is my professional bank account. And that is in my sole name because that is how it needs to be. And therefore, she would get access to that by accessing my mobile, assuming she had access to my mobile. If she didn't have access to my mobile, I left signed checks for that particular account in her name so that she could, I left a couple of checks, I think 4 or 5 checks, so that she could have access even in the absence of a mobile. As far as my father's resources was concerned, my sister was anyways there, so she could take over at any time. That was not a problem. But because she was not handling it, I wrote a large note on how to handle it, should I not be around to guide her. And all this was shared again with my son. This is as far as my personal resources was concerned. My son stays independently, very close by. So I shared it with him. I think the key with all these workarounds are, they are great if this situation arises, but the trade-off is that they can be misused. So you need to make whatever decisions you take on the workaround, make sure that you take it yourself, or whosoever person takes it himself or herself. And so if you're signing a check, for example, I signed a check, I made it account payee, not negotiable. I signed it in favor of my spouse, the name of my spouse. Okay. If you have a Demat account in your personal name, okay, then you make sure that you sign a blank Demat slip in favor of your spouse, your child, and keep that check and that Demat slip in a safe place, which the spouse or the child can access should the need arise. Otherwise, they are in your control. So one, of course, register your email ID and mobile in all bank accounts, all Demat accounts, all investment accounts. Wherever they are in a single name, keep signed checks and Demat slips in favor of whosoever, your spouse, your child. Keep that in safe custody. Give access to your mobile. I think that's a necessary price to pay. Okay, that at least to one person should have access to your mobile in terms of knowing the lock codes or the mobile, whosoever you feel comfortable giving that kind of an access. For immovable assets, it's tougher. The only thing that can probably work for immovable asset is a registered power of attorney. Even that, as I mentioned earlier, may or may not work The buyer may or may not be comfortable if the property needs to be sold. Okay. And if the registered PA does not work, then in the case of immovable property, only a court order can help. There is no choice in that matter. So what are the areas in which we can help? How can we use these learnings? How have we used them for clients? How can we use them for any of you, those who are interested? Okay. One, I think talking about money is a taboo subject in Indian families. We don't believe in talking about. So the level of difficulty that you have in discussing what to do. So after this event happened, we discussed around the table in my own family about what to do. Should we use artificial life mint? It was easy in my family because we had been through that experience just then. But I think facilitating ways in which these kind of decisions, these kind of things can be discussed. Okay. I think that's where we have lots of experience on, where it can really help you. I mean, I have not taken a poll here, but if I was to take a poll, how many of you have been, so I mean, people have not even prepared their own will, but forget about that. How many of us or you have actually spoken to your parents whether they have made arrangements for their inheritance? I mean, typically if you ask your parent that, you know, have you made proper arrangements, he'll say, "Kyun? Mere marne ki tayari kar raha hai tu." So the point is that talking about money is taboo, but there are safe ways, there are sensitive ways in which this kind of conversation can be fostered. Okay, we can do this, we can be there, or we can suggest ways in which this kind of discussions can be fostered. One of the important things is clients can document their wishes on whether prolonged artificial life maintenance procedures should be used. Do they want to donate organs should the inevitable thing happen? I think these are important conversations. We are able to help our clients have these discussions. It makes sense that you let people around you, not just your immediate family, even your extended family, because even there are a lot of taboos around organ donation, for example. I think, so imagine when artificial life maintenance, for most people, in our case, that was not that was not an issue. The money part was not an issue. Still, we had huge difficulties in taking that decision. Now imagine if you compound those difficulties with the high cost of artificial life maintenance. Imagine the kind of burden that you are putting on your family members. Doesn't it make sense that you talk about it so that whatever decision is taken, the guilt feeling that a family member has, the feeling whether he has taken the right decision or not, is not there. We can help you do this. We can help you have this discussion within your family. Again, we can use the experience we have in terms of, so for all our clients, we will do a checklist. Okay. In terms of the will, in terms of preparing for disability, this is something that we are now putting in place for all our clients. And I think we have some financial planners, presumably in the audience as well. I would urge you to also take this into account while dealing with your own clients. But first, do it for yourself. It will give you so much experience in being able to do it for clients. And obviously, the standard will process, the other processes, succession planning processes, how to think about them in cases where it is very, very large. Look at the trade-offs between doing a trust structure or doing a will structure, etc. All those we can help our clients with. Before I take questions, can I run a poll? Jinay, can we run a poll to see whether people have liked this?
Yes, sir. I'll just do it. So before we assimilate your Q&A, we would really like to you guys to give us the poll for today. So you can stop sharing the screen.
That's what I have to learn how to do it.
Okay, more or less people have voted. I'll end the poll now. So I think they've loved it. As usual, they've loved your session. So yeah, this Shrikant is saying, please provide an option 6. Definitely.
Okay, Shrikant for this from Perfios.
Okay.
Thank you, Shrikant.
So participants are requested to put their Q&A in the Q&A box. In the meanwhile, we take our questions now. So sir, the first question is from Srinivas Gadiyar. So he's asking. So you had shared 2 to 3 types of banks. He's asking what type of bank was the second one. Was it a cooperative bank?
No. The second bank is among the largest private sector banks in the country.
Okay. Okay. So Praveen Khandelwal is asking, does a power of attorney expire automatically, and is it to be renewed? Does a power of attorney expire automatically, and is it to be renewed?
So I think a power of attorney will not expire automatically unless there is an expiry date mentioned in the power of attorney. It of course expires automatically at the death of the person who gives the power of attorney, very clearly. Does it expire when the person is incapable of doing a contract? That I think is a point that I had already raised during that.
Right, sir. Sujay Natkani is asking, can one of the conditions of the POA itself be that it become operational when the person is physically or mentally indisposed? Great question.
Oh, absolutely. That is what I meant by Sujay. So that is what I meant by a conditional power of attorney. Right. As I said, clients were not comfortable doing that power of attorney without a condition. So they put in that condition that only if I am not capable of contracting, only then that will become operational.
Correct. Preeti is asking for immovable property. The POA rules are governed by states.
Yes, absolutely. The stamp duty and registration, that is governed by the states, very clearly. Yes.
Right. Hitesh is asking, can you please mail us the usual do's and don'ts and the workarounds, please? Do's and don'ts and the workarounds. They're requesting email.
So it's there in the presentation. I think this would be available. A recording of this would be available. So I think people can access the recording of this. And
correct.
We've turned this into what they call a webinar on demand. So in fact, you can send the registration link to your friends, and once they register, they can watch a recorded version. Or so we are led to believe. I mean, we have not done a webinar on demand so far. This is the first time we are doing it. I believe that is what happens.
Right. Right. Srinivas Gadiyar again is asking for use of life support, donation of body parts post death. What type of document is required? Just a plain paper or sign.
Sorry, come again.
So he's asking for the use of artificial life support, donation of body parts post death. Okay. What type of document is required?
Okay. There is this controversy about a living will. I mean, in the other webinars we have done on this subject, people spoke about a living will. Okay. In India, we do not recognize a living will, but there is a Supreme Court decision on, and everybody is familiar with the famous Aruna Shanbag case, who was in a coma for, I think, close to 40 years. Okay. And there was a very impassioned debate about whether it is worth living for so long and what would she have wanted, whether the artificial life intelligence should be removed.
Right.
So what the Supreme Court has said, I believe, I'm not a lawyer, what I believe they have said is that you can decide in advance, okay, whether you want artificial, so the intentions are known, you can do it in writing, there is a method of doing it,
Right.
but it will still be decided by a medical board, okay, whether the condition is bad enough for the advance directive to be used or not used, okay. So it is a hazy situation. I think only lawyers can answer. The point I want to make people here is that in most cases, you know, the doctors will always ask you, do you want artificial life maintenance to be used or not? Now the patient is not in a condition to answer. So the burden falls upon the relatives, the son, the daughter, the spouse, the brothers, sisters, things like that. How do they take a decision? And please remember, it has financial implications, it has all kinds of implications, okay, and you have to take a decision under pressure. So help them by making it known in advance what you want to do, what you would have wanted to be done. I think that it is not necessary they will follow. For example, you may say that don't use artificial life maintenance. Your son may still decide I want to use, but at least whatever way he decides, at least there is no feeling ki, oh, what would Papa have wanted? At least that part is cleared.
Great, sir. So KJ Singh has asked, what if we don't inform about the death of the owner of the POA? Can he still continue using the POA, though it may not be legally not allowed? Okay. The answer is in the question.
So what will you use it for? You're going to use, if you're using it for immovable property, the buyer will ask, boss, I want proof. That is the problem. Okay. In movable property, he may get away with it. In immovable property, it would be require a pretty dumb buyer, you know, to accept that kind of a power of attorney.
Okay. Okay. Parveen Jijaboy is asking, please explain conditional POA and unconditional POA.
I think we answered that question. A conditional POA, Sujay had asked that question.
Right.
And we answered that question by saying that, you know, conditional is where it is triggered on the person, the grantor, becoming incapacitated.
Srinath Vedula is asking, can we change the POA? Will it entail? So Srinath Vedula is asking, can we change the POA? That's the first question. Second is, will it entail the same cost as the first one?
No, change it. I mean, I don't know. Change it from what perspective? I mean, I presume you want to change the person. If you want to change the person, it will entail the same costs. Yes.
Right.
Immovable property. Otherwise, the costs are not very high. Movable property, the costs are not very high.
Correct.
It's because of the stamping and registration, the costs become high.
Correct. So Palak Rumta has asked, you are right when you said that these are very sensitive topics to talk about in an Indian family. Absolutely, I too agree. How would a person go about it or initiate the same in case the children who want to talk about it are really young?
So that's a very interesting, extremely interesting question, Palak. One of the things that I discovered, again, a lot of it is sharing my own personal experiences. See, I discovered this by necessity, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. There was a point of time when there was a significant expenditure that I needed to incur for my son, and where the financial situation was not such that I felt comfortable taking on that kind of a burden. And it was at an age where, you feel diffident about talking to your own children about money matters.
Right.
Then I decided the best way to do this, okay, is to make everything open to them. You see, this is my plan. Okay. This is our situation. Okay. And then we have slowly now come upon a family tradition where I think when we take our family holiday, we reserve an half an hour or an hour to talk about the financial situation. Okay. So they are well aware, and therefore I think awareness in giving information and awareness is incidentally, this is something on which I'm going to write about and talk about, and maybe have a different webinar on various things that you can do to foster this communication.
Right, sir. Right. I think that's very interesting that you take half an hour out of your annual vacation and discuss these matters. I think a lot of people would really be motivated by that. So coming to the next question, Hitesh Sangui has asked, can a joint living come POA be registered?
Joint what?
Joint living will. Sorry.
Living will. So I think living will is a not recognized in India, as I mentioned. Living just for everybody, because these are terms you will hear. Living will, advanced directives, all these mean what do I, so that is actually what we spoke about, making it clear what you want to do in the event of you not being in a position to take decisions about your own medical treatment protocols. Okay. So I think if you can you want to put it in writing, do so. Okay. And I think people who are suffering from specific critical illnesses do that very often, because they anticipate that this kind of situation will happen. In most cases, I think it is sufficient if your family has discussed it, and family and extended family in the Indian context is aware of your views.
Right, sir. Nikhil Valvalkar has asked, if I appoint my wife POA holder of all my movable assets, will it help her to control my DMAT account? What happens to my POA signed in favor of my broker? How do they differ from each other? I think quite interesting.
So interesting question. I mean, POA to broker has been a matter of some controversy given what happened with Karvi, etc. So now the broker's POA is limited. If you have made a sale transaction with the broker can use the POA to transfer those assets to the pool account from where it will get transferred to the clearing house. That is all that the broker can use. The broker cannot use the POA to transfer it to another DMAT account. So that is why I mentioned, if you want to sell the shares, just having a POA with the the broker's DMAT account is good enough. You do the sale order and the broker will deliver the shares. You don't need the person's signature. But if you don't want to sell the shares, then what? Okay, that is the issue. So that is how it differs. And he's right, the question is right, that if you have given a power of attorney on your DMAT account, that will help the spouse control the DMAT account.
Right, sir. So Harry's asked, can you please share the presentation by email as well? Harry has asked if you can please share the presentation by email.
So I think a link will be given and which you can watch the recorded version.
Shrikant Rajagopalan is asking, who decides that the person is incapable of contracting and how it is documented? Any bureaucracy involved here?
Oh, absolutely. So excellent question, Shrikant. That's a lovely question. It depends on the terms of your power of attorney. So for example, we did a conditional power of attorney for a client where the client himself has provided, okay, that my mental incapacitation, so it's a conditional power of attorney in favor of his son, that my mental incapacitation shall be certified by Mr. So-and-so, is a neurologist whom he trusts, Dr. So-and-so, the neurologist that he trusts. And if that doctor is not available or is unwilling to certify, okay, then any two neurologists can certify that. That is what he has put. So that is a condition. So to answer it depends. If you have given an unconditional, then there is no bureaucracy. The bureaucracy comes from what the buyer wants. So suppose you are using the conditional power of attorney to transfer demat shares from one account to another. Let's say it's a not a listed company and the shares are dematted, and using the power of attorney to transfer off market to another demat account. The buyer would now, because he is paying good consideration, okay, would want to be sure that, you know, the power of attorney is valid.
Right, right. Going to the next question, Raghavendra has asked, do we have to mention about disability and then only the POA comes to effect?
Do you have to be?
Do we have to mention about the disability or disability?
Disability, okay.
Okay, we'll go with the
Disability. No, so I always prefer, I mean, if you want to give the POA, it is always better to do an unconditional POA. So unless you are extremely uncomfortable, it is always good to do an unconditional POA. And even though the spouse may be as old as you are, I mean, this is really relevant. See, for younger people, but that should not be a problem, okay? And older people can try, I mean, even though the spouse probably is as old as you are, okay, right, you can still do a unconditional power of attorney.
Okay. Srinath Vidula has asked again, as passive enthusiast has become legal,
no,
is it a subject to be included in the will too?
No, so will is after death. Please remember, that's why advanced directives are called a living will. Will always comes into effect after death. Okay? So it's obviously not to be included in a will. Okay, passive euthanasia, whatever way that is pronounced. Okay, euthanasia. That's right. So whichever way that is there, it's not, I mean, no doctor will do it. It's not legal in India. Okay. But if the patient himself does it, for example, you have the Jain system of, you know, fasting on. So it's a controversial subject. I better keep away from
it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So Jitendra has commented that living will are now getting registered in India after Supreme Court order, I guess.
Those are called advanced directives. How
effective they are.
Enforceable they are, God alone knows.
Yes. So Avinash has asked if you're okay with answering. Okay, since such a POA is quite a cutting edge in India, do you find that a significant proportion of your clients are willing to create a POA?
Yes, so now they are beginning to, I think it requires for it to happen to somebody you know. Okay, and obviously my clients know me, they know my story. And in fact, when I've spoken to my clients, that's how I was inspired to do this, because they said you must share this experience, right? Yes, to answer the question, yes, people are willing. There is some level of discomfort. There is huge level of inertia. More than discomfort, I think there is a huge level of inertia, and there is this feeling that it will not happen to me. Okay, it was an off chance that it happened to Harsh. Okay, this is not going to happen to me. You want to give into that? I think as a planner, I urge clients, and now what we are trying to put in place in our practice is that at every review, we will hammer it at the client. Okay, that you have not done this. You should tell us you don't want to do it, fine, but let it be a conscious decision. Karna hai to we will be after you, that you make sure that you do it. In fact, that's an area of practice. There are planners here, some of them have left, but there are planners here. One area of that clients love about you is the fact that be after them. You told me you wanted to make a will. Okay. Either you tell me you don't want to make. Okay. If you've told me you want to make a will, every time I'm going to remind you about it.
Absolutely, sir. I think it's one of the most important decisions and one we take not very seriously. So I think with that, there's a wrap on the Q&A session. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights on the subject. I'm very sure, looking at the number of questions, people have really, loved your session. It's just great. It's just great. The quality of the session is always proportional to the number of questions asked. Is something that somebody had told me once. And so over to you, sir, for the final comments.
So thank you, everyone. I just want to, first of all, thank you for hearing my story so patiently. More, I want to tell you, okay, that don't give in to inertia. This 1 hour that you have spent would be worth it if you take some action. And one of the best ways to take some action, okay, is to pay your advisor a fee to make sure he forces you to take that action. Now that's a self-serving kind of a statement, but it is valuable. The advisor is valuable for this reason, okay. It is like paying a year's annual fee to the gym. Because you have paid the fee, you will actually go to the gym, okay. So pay your advisor if you've decided. If you think it's not important, don't do it. If you think it is important, please make sure there is somebody who's after you to make your life uncomfortable if you don't do it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You've been a great audience. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Good night.